The 14 princes of the Kakin Empire represent a broad spectrum of humanity. Every area of human interest and pursuit are present within these princes, from art, science, religion, business, as well as a more wide spectrum of evil and innocence, with rather complex dynamics forming between princes of opposing pursuits, which is most evident in 1st Prince Benjamin and 9th Prince Halkenburg. These two are on a particularly horrifying journey, starting at completely opposite ends of the spectrum. Not just one spectrum either, all of the spectrums, spectri, with one prince being gradually redeemed and another prince being gradually corrupted, which is a very classic Yoshihiro Togashi idea of humanity not being as simple as black and white, finding the bad in the good and the good in the bad. But these two are set up to be completely contrasting characters initially. For a very basic example, let's take their introductions. The first panel of 1st Prince Benjamin in Hunter x Hunter showcases him wrestling a lion, very much emphasizing the pursuit of physical dominance, whereas our first panel of Halkenburg shows him immersed in intensive study surrounded by books, emphasizing the pursuit of strengthening the mind. Only one of them is in a literal gym, but both of them are training in their respective gyms, and they are striving to reach the highest level of their pursuits. Benjamin being a physical prodigy, surpassing the limits of human strength before we even talk about Nen, and Halkenburg is an academic prodigy who attended the most prestigious university in the Hunter x Hunter world at the mere age of 15. And along with this, we have the, I guess, stereotypical contrast of anger versus composure. In the early stages of the succession contest, Benjamin was portrayed as a perpetually angry man, like a pot of violence threatening to boil over on the rage stove at all times, and on multiple occasions he was depicted with a monstrous and truly terrifying aura. Whereas Halkenburg is generally drawn as a calm, collected, just sort of kind of dude guy. What's he doing here? Very relatable, and when he does show emotion, it's usually sympathy and empathy for his siblings as they die one by one throughout this contest. But in addition to that, there's also an exploration of legitimacy versus illegitimacy, as Benjamin and Halkenburg are actually both sons of 1st Queen Unma. However, Halkenburg was raised by 2nd Queen Dwazel under the guise of being her son, which was done to protect Halkenburg from assassination due to the political structure of the queen hierarchy. I'm not going to lay it all out in this video because you talk about queens and things get very complicated all of a sudden, but the order of the princes within the Kakin Empire has much less impact on their political power than the order of queens. Which birth hole you came out of is much more important than which order you came out of them. So there is this question of legitimacy, with Benjamin being legally recognized as the son of the 1st queen, whilst Halkenburg is not, and therefore somewhat illegitimate, or at the very least much less legitimate. But then we have the two most profound differences, the first of which is their preferred visions of the Kakin Empire. Benjamin is the deputy military advisor of the Kakin army, and he sees a future of authoritarian rule when he should become king, remembering that that's not even a question in his mind. Benjamin believes in his right to rule as per the structure of the Kakin hierarchy. He thinks that it's foolish for anyone else to even challenge the position of the 1st prince, who is legally next in line to the throne. So he's a real rules purist, which is very convenient because the rules just happen to benefit him the most. And he's also a very proud nationalist. A big misconception about 1st Prince Benjamin is that he's quite a selfish prince, but not at all. What he is trying to do is to protect the integrity of the Kakin Empire and defend what has already been built. And you can see that with lines such as, "I, Benjamin, will personally prune the diseased branches. I swear here and now to protect the great tree of Kakin." And perhaps unsurprisingly, Benjamin sees his win condition of the contest as activating martial law aboard the Black Whale 1, and so placing everything under his sole command. Meanwhile, Halkenburg is someone striving to destroy everything that the Kakin Empire is. He wants to dismantle the monarchy and install a democratic system of government, although it's one that he doesn't even initially see himself being a part of. With one big critique of Halkenburg is that he wants change but doesn't want to take action. He wasn't willing to be the leader of this movement, but it's the supporters of his ideology that are kind of forcibly installing him as their leader. And Halkenburg is now very much struggling with how to effectively fill that role, with the other key major contention being their willingness to kill. 1st Prince Benjamin is not afraid to kill, not at all. In fact, one of the very first things he does is kill the lion that he was wrestling in the opening scene whilst he was on a phone call with Brother Saraidnik, claiming that he was going to kill him with his own hands. And as we've touched on once already, this is also reflected visually. Often Benjamin is drawn almost like a monster than a human, like some sort of bloodthirsty, violent troll, whereas Halkenburg is initially a complete pacifist. He refuses to participate not only in the contest, but it's his goal not to actively hurt anyone, and so he's drawn as quite meek, very small man who you wouldn't even notice was in the manga, if not for Togashi for some reason continuing to cut to him and examine his thoughts. thoughts. And something that I like is that the killing philosophy is reflected in the immediate entourage of each prince, which stems from a quote by 8th Queen Oito. Pro-bodyguards may specialize in protecting important people, but they haven't had any training at all in proactively killing people. So Oito here isn't specifically referring to, but is perfectly characterizing Halkenburg's bodyguards versus Benjamin's bodyguards, who are all from the Kakin military, where they were trained in proactively killing people. And Halkenburg is also said by Oito to be the hope of all princes who are in the weakest position. Meanwhile, Benjamin is the primary face of complete and utter despair. The oldest prince with by far the most power and influence, who is dedicated to preserving the Kakin system of rule. There is no hope of change under Benjamin's reign, only the despair of knowing that everything will remain exactly as it is. So the 1st and 9th are set up to be completely opposite princes. However, they do have a couple of key similarities as well. The first is that Halkenburg does indeed have the skill of a warrior, just as Benjamin does. Halkenburg is not at all incapable of combat, and this often goes unnoticed, but when we're first being introduced to Halkenburg, when all of his academic achievements are being listed, it's also noted that he was an archery enthusiast and even won a gold medal in the World Archery Contest. So he may not be trained in Nen or hand-to-hand combat or even have the desire to fight at all, but Halkenburg is a world-class warrior in his own right. He is someone to be feared with a bow and arrow. And in addition to that, Benjamin and Halkenburg both have Nen abilities based around testing and using the loyalty of those around them. Benjamin Baton allows him to inherit the Nen abilities of his most loyal soldiers who die in his service, whilst Halkenburg's Guardian Spirit Beast and Lee Dissonance abilities mark those who are truly loyal to him and then proceeds to use their aura to charge Halkenburg's attacks. So it is very interesting that both abilities are based around consolidating power within a singular figure. In Benjamin's case, I think that makes a lot of sense because that's his stated goal, but in Halkenburg's case, that has put him on a very dangerous path. And as time goes on, what's happening with these two princes is a role swap, with Halkenburg being corrupted into a pretty chilling antagonistic presence, whilst Benjamin is very slowly becoming a much more sympathetic and almost protagonistic figure. Almost. He's not quite there yet, and I don't know if he ever will be because this is Hunter x Hunter. But putting aside all writing and plot elements for a second, you can see this transformation in Togashi's art alone. Togashi now draws First Prince Benjamin significantly more human than he once did. In more recent events, Benjamin has much softer facial features, he's depicted as much less physically imposing when in the same space as other princes or bodyguards, and even in chapter 410, when he's marching to enact martial law and seize power, Togashi chooses to draw him in a very human manner. In fact, a lot of his close-up shots tend to look like how Togashi drew early Halkenburg. So there's a lot of warmth and doubt mixed into Benjamin's determination, where he was once drawn with relentless, cold, demonic confidence. And something else that's very much humanized him is the revelation that Prince Benjamin has a secret child. And currently, Benjamin isn't fighting for himself at all. We'll get into this in a bit, but Benjamin's death in this contest is now guaranteed. So everything he's doing right now is for the sake of making sure that his child inherits the Kakin throne. Part of this is because he obviously believes in the structure of the empire and the rules, specifically in his right to inherit the throne as the firstborn, and therefore his firstborn's right to inherit it. We're just speedrunning that process. But also because if Benjamin fails and another prince wins the contest, then his child is almost certainly going to be killed, and the Kakin Empire as he knows it will be destroyed. But focusing more on that first part, we're now able to identify with Benjamin a bit more as a basic human with a desire to protect someone precious to him. So we've gone from authoritative dictatorial monster to almost a tragic father figure. It's quite the transformation. And in regards to his dialogue, Benjamin no longer talks about killing as if he's relishing the act, and he's also shown significantly more empathy towards his siblings, which was previously Halkenburg's trait. Upon meeting with Fugetsu, Benjamin was shocked to see her being consumed by spirits and on the verge of death, and this wasn't something that he took pleasure in seeing, which many other princes would have. And when Halkenburg's body does die, Benjamin orders Balsamilko Might, whose body actually contains the soul of Halkenburg, to honor all of Halkenburg's last wishes. And Benjamin further emphasized that everything was to be handled solemnly, respectfully, and with dignity. So Benjamin isn't this killing machine monster we once thought he was. Although the only exception to Benjamin's empathy appears to be Saraidnik. On 2 occasions now, Benjamin has stated that he's going to kill Saraidnik with his bare hands. However, both of those occasions took place in the early part of the succession contest. And that's very important because I'm not convinced that Benjamin's, I guess we'll call it redemption, was planned at the time of his introduction. Instead, I think this evolution is a result of the extremely long process that it's taken to bring the succession contest contest arc to fruition. Because the first time that Hunter x Hunter readers met Prince Benjamin was in 2014, when he was portrayed as pretty unambiguously villainous, and if Hunter x Hunter had stayed on a weekly manga schedule, I do believe that's how he would have remained. But at the time of this recording, the last time that we saw Benjamin was in 2024. So this character has had 10 years of evolution happening within the mind of Yoshihiro Togashi. Most manga authors don't have that luxury, which is why a lot of weekly shonen villains do end up being a bit flat and boring, because their authors don't have the time in their brutal schedule to properly think and give that villain something to work with. But Togashi has had nothing but time with the Succession contest. Chapters have come out in batches of 10 with breaks of anywhere from 6 months to 3 years between batches, giving us 10 long years of Succession contest slow drip content, during which time First Prince Benjamin has changed from his inception, as has Halkenburg. But unlike Benjamin, I do think that Halkenburg's change was planned from the very beginning, because one of the first things we hear about Halkenburg is 8th Queen Oito's explanation of Halkenburg's desires, as well as the effect they've had on the Kakin Empire. He wanted to change the royal family's government from its roots, and it was that outward attitude that gathered supporters for him. Gradually, he began to attain power and authority, and also, consequently, there were constantly rumors of assassination abound even among his supporters. People used him, changing his image to try and create a dictatorship. So Halkenburg himself is aiming to morph this empire into a democracy, but that desire is being used by those around him to craft a dictatorship. So even though this isn't his intention at all, Halkenburg is being steered down the same path that Benjamin has elected to drive down. There is immense pressure put on Halkenburg by his followers to take and wield power, and they quite literally fuel him with aura for the sake of Halkenburg claiming that absolute authority, which a lot of them now see as the way forward, because Halkenburg, he's the hope of the future. If he wins the contest, if he becomes king, then he'll be fair and everything will change for the better. And that may have been true if pre-contest Halkenburg had been gifted power, but through this contest, Halkenburg is gradually abandoning all of his pre-contest principles. After the deaths of some of his siblings, Halkenburg was very quick to abandon his principle of pacifism and startlingly quickly performed a mental 180 into believing that killing is the only solution in this contest, which I should point out isn't necessarily the case. Early on, there's a discussion between King Nasubi and Second Prince Camilla, where she urges him to define a quote dropout as someone who is biologically dead, but Nasubi states that how each prince defines a dropout is part of the contest, implying that there could be a way to win without actually killing all of the other princes, which isn't an option that most princes have considered, although it is one that Halkenburg briefly thought of, as his first solution to ending the contest was to march into his father King Nasubi's room and murder him, but that was stopped by Nasubi's guardian spirit beast. However, Halkenburg's intent here was more than enough to show that he's already in a bit of a moral freefall. This self-proclaimed pacifist was about to murder his father, and then when that didn't work, Halkenburg was going to try removing himself, and when both of those options failed, he resolved to play the game and murder his siblings. And after this moment, just as Benjamin is now drawn like early Halkenburg, Halkenburg has now taken on a lot of the artistic traits of early Benjamin, portrayed as much more of a monstrous entity than a human being. Halkenburg's eyes are now cold and calculated, as if he's been stripped of all empathy, and his new views on the world may be very much at odds with the democratic desires of his supporters. Halkenburg is learning that the only way to enact change is to do it himself, just as his father Nasubi told him. Tell me you don't need a king after you become one. So Halkenburg's goals I don't think are now particularly different from Benjamin's, and it's becoming increasingly vague what Halkenburg plans to do with that power if and when he attains it. All I know is that I don't necessarily see him as the hope of this contest anymore. And to me it looks like the ideologies of the opposite spectrums of Benjamin and Halkenburg are going to meet tragically in the middle, because we do have one final similarity, which is that both Benjamin and Halkenburg are now on a clock. Each of their bodies have been infected with TSK-17, a biological weapon that kills its target within 12 hours. And as of chapter 410, that's all the time on this planet that Benjamin has remaining. Meanwhile, Halkenburg's body has already died due to the infection. However, his soul has been installed into the body of Balsamilka Might. And what's happening here is a lot more complicated than I'm about to give it credit for, but Halkenburg is now in a situation where he is fighting for control of this body against Might's soul. And the only way to keep control is to take a sedative, keeping Might's consciousness asleep. And Halkenburg has stated that he now has has about 10 hours, about the same time that Benjamin has, until Balsamilka Might wakes up to ensure that he is the victor of the succession contest, and if Might does successfully regain control, then Halkenburg's mind will be forced into a potentially permanent sleep. TLDR, due to being infected by the same weapon, both Benjamin and Halkenburg have about 10 hours to enact their plans or they're done. And I can't see this being a particularly happy ending for either party. It feels a lot to me like Halkenburg and Benjamin, two people who entered this world through the same place, aka First Queen Unma's birthing cave, are going to leave this world together through the TSK-17. And it's likely that neither will be able to complete their goals, resulting in a lovely message of futility from Togashi, that even those who hold polar opposite views to us are more similar than we thought, and that even with the best of intentions, we can still be corrupted, as well as endure great struggle just to leave this world with absolutely nothing.